And we're back. This probably wasn't what you were expecting when you clicked on that thumbnail. It's very deceiving. We might as well talk about it. I'm in my car. It's a pretty interesting backdrop with some recording equipment, a lamp, and my laptop. So I'm at my house in my garage, in the dark, kind of. And the reason I'm in my car is because it's pretty good acoustically and I can just sort of do what I want out here unimpeded by interruptions, and it's kind of soundproofed, I guess. So the reason I'm doing a video is to support a blog post on my website. I'll leave a link in the description to my website, daveafulton.com. And I'm kind of just doing this as to form a habit where I just speak openly and sift through what's going on in the back of my mind. And I think it's good practice to just practice communicating and writing and speaking and sifting through all those things that go on in your mind. It's quite a healthy habit, I think. Now, the previous video and blog post was called "Does God Exist?" Now, don't worry, it's not what you think. It's just kind of a thought bubble experiment where I just speak to some ideas that I'd been thinking about on a day-to-day basis. It's not so much a religious thing or necessarily finding an answer to that question. Now, this blog post is called "Pump the Brakes?" ? And the reason it's called that is because I'm sure many of you can relate that over the past 2 years, you probably felt like just putting a stop on all the nonsense and these crazy times that we're living through, and just, all the things going on in your life which you can't control. Now, for people like me, I'm from Australia. I live in Victoria, in Melbourne, and we faced some of the harshest lockdowns in the world. I think somebody said, I'm not sure if this is true necessarily, but I think it's pretty close. We've been in lockdown for 250 days in total. Those restrictions have changed much during that time, but I think some of the worst ones were we were constrained to a 5 kilometre radius from our house. We're only allowed to go shopping once a day for essentials. We could only exercise for 1 hour a day outside. We obviously had to wear masks everywhere. To kind of keep those new case numbers down. We went in and out of lockdown several times, but in total, I think it's taken a massive toll on everybody. Now, for me personally, I was quite fortunate. I work as an engineer for a renewable energy company, and we were deemed an essential service, which is kind of fucked up if you think about it, because what that means is a lot of other people in their jobs and professions were not deemed essential. And that's terrible because many of my friends and family lost their jobs or had to rethink their approach to work, and it was at a massive detriment. When politicians are telling you to stay home and you need to make a living to pay your bills, it's kind of a crock of shit. I don't think it was the best approach necessarily, but I won't go into it too much. But I'm sure people around the world can relate to that in different varying degrees. But what I might do is, before I go into the blog post too much, I might just explain to give you some context to why I have this particular stance on getting through difficult times and pumping the brakes when you need to. So when I was 25 years old, I was diagnosed with bipolar. It's a pretty hot diagnosis at the moment. It doesn't really help me much. It's still a very subjective experience, and I still have to deal with, different things compared to everybody else, but it's me dealing with it at the end of the day. So it doesn't really change anything, but it does help my sort of friends and family and medical professionals deal with helping me, whatever my particular troubles might be. Not that I've had to deal with much over the past few years. I've been out of hospital free. But what did happen, we'll go back a little bit. So when I was a teenager, I kind of had a peculiar perspective on the world. And I ended up, just pushing through sort of my mental health complications. And ended up going to university, working night shift, moving out of home, doing some relatively normal things on top of that. But just kept trying to push and follow my dreams. And I eventually, all that hard work paid off. When I was in my early 20s, I went to BMW in Munich at their research and development center. and worked there for a year, and that was quite that was a great experience. And when I got back from that, I just kept going. I didn't really know how to slow down, and I found another job, kept piling on a lot of pressure to myself, and really trying to break through, human constraints, to put it simply. And what ended up happening is I did break through, at a massive detriment. And for most people that aren't aware of what bipolar necessarily is, you kind of have these two extremes where, in one hand, you have mania, which is when you feel elated, in flow. You're kind of running around all over the place doing a million things at once. You don't necessarily need to sleep much. And then on the other hand, you have depression, or being suicidally depressed, which I think most people are aware of at this point. It's a lot of people suffer from depression around the world, and it's just feeling shit. In case you're wondering. So I was, and one of the ways you're diagnosed is when you actually have to be taken to hospital, because you're a danger to yourself or the public. Not that I necessarily was. I never really became aggressive or tried to hurt people, especially those close to me. It was more that I was just a very strange acting unit. And, I do crazy things like break into people's backyards and jump in their hot tub and stay there all night, and, take my clothes off and sit in the sun in a public area. There's lots of funny things to look back on that I might explain in future videos. But the other side of that is, and what happened to me when I was 25, is that I was manic for 3 or 4 weeks straight, which is like being on ecstasy, DMT, LSD all at once, and then having that cut off, and then you come down like you've never come down before, and you become suicidally depressed, which was something I'd been depressed previously when I was younger, but nothing like this, and it really shook me up, and I'm just probably still getting over it to this day to some extent, even though I'm doing reasonably well now. And then I eventually reached some kind of new level of normality where I just went back to normal for me, which is being a perfectionist and pushing really hard, and piling on unnecessary pressure and trying to be more than what I am, essentially. And that kind of that ended up with me becoming manic once again. And then this went on for some years, about 3 years, where I would just go back to business as usual, keep pushing really hard, break through, become manic, then depressed, then reach a new level of normality, and then the same again. And during that period, I was given all types of medication, lithium, antipsychotics, antidepressants. I actually had ECT. I had 2 rounds of ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, which was terrible and quite traumatic, especially when you didn't agree to it. And when I was 27 years old, it stopped, and I haven't been manic. I've been varying degrees of manic and depressed throughout that time, but I would say not much more than your average Joe. So yeah, it stopped when I was 27, and the reason it stopped, and back to the blog post, is that I pumped the brakes and came to a complete stop. So what does that mean? So what I did is I just I stopped trying to be more than I am. I stopped, and I also stopped. I just became, I just gave in to life, is how I kind of put it. I just, I obviously ate food and showered when I need to, but I didn't really, I didn't really try to push myself to follow my passions or pile on, unnecessary tasks, or just go that extra mile that's kind of unnecessary, and is at a great detriment sometimes when you just when you're trying to do something perfectly that doesn't really require that, whether it's folding your clothes, writing an essay, or doing schoolwork, whatever it might be for you. I just stopped, stopped trying to be something that I'm not, and just gave in to feeling like shit, and just dealing with what was going on in the back of my mind. And what I started doing at that point is writing a book. which is on my website as well, Patient Doctor Privilege. And that was kind of the beginning of the journey of recovery for me, was when I gave in. Now, the reason that's relevant is because a lot of people don't really know that's an option. And I wouldn't really encourage people to do it necessarily, is to just stop and give up and give in and just work on what's actually wrong with you at the time. And not that you necessarily have to find solutions to what's wrong with you, but what you will find is that things will materialize in due course. You don't need to force it to happen, which is contrary to what many motivational speakers try to push and peddle, is that you have to get up early, you have to chase your dreams religiously, you have to never take no for an answer, keep pushing, try harder. There's only winners and losers in this world. And sure, that is a valid perspective to a certain extent, but it doesn't really help you when you feel like shit. It might help when you're procrastinating or feeling lazy or not really living up to your potential. Perhaps your mental health is relatively okay. You just can't quite get your shit together enough to kind of do something with yourself. And I think at that point, a little nudge is a good thing. But when you're down and out, like many people have been through this pandemic, and you're just feeling run down, worn out, depressed, maybe drinking too much alcohol, whatever it might be, and those kinds of motivational words of wisdom, they're not really going to resonate with you or help you. And so what do you do if you are in that position? And I think the way I put it is, it's quite a dangerous stance to take, because you don't really know how far down or when you're going to reach the bottom. So the way I put it is just to let the things at the top of your head that are occupying you every day, just stop what you're doing and let them reach the bottom. And what can happen, and it happened to me when I was 27, is that I just kind of lost who I was. Nothing really mattered to me anymore. But what did happen is, I learnt to be okay with that. And the way I put it in the blog post is that, that shell of a human being that's barely functional, it's still you, and that still matters, and you don't need to be anything more than that. Everything else is a bonus. So if you are feeling shit and you're minimally functional, that's okay. Maybe just getting up and making dinner is enough for you for one day. Or maybe it's just as simple as going into work late. Or maybe it's just as simple as going on a holiday. Whatever it might be, you don't need to keep going. You can pump the brakes and just learn to just sit still and be okay with feeling shit. Because what you will find is, in time, there'll be this little whispering in the back of your mind saying, maybe you should get up early today. Maybe you should go for a run. Maybe you should try and eat better. Maybe you should work out. Maybe you should, do that thing you've always wanted to do. Write a book, travel overseas, quit your job, whatever it might be. All those things will come back, and you don't need to do those things when you feel like shit. And I think that's a pretty good place to end it. So cheers. I'll see you in the next video. Go over to daveafulton.com if you feel like it. Cheers.